And I was wondering, I know that you talk about something in your work called the worst day cycle. I would
Yeah,
love if we could learn a little bit more about that and if that cycle is at all tied to abandonment and betrayal.
it's completely tied to it. It's something, I discovered it's kind of born out of what, was developed almost 100 years ago, something called the repetition compulsion, but they could never really solve exactly how it works. And, I think I've done that. And what the worst day cycle contains four things: trauma, fear, shame, and denial. I wrote a whole book on it, so it's kind of an in-depth process, but I'll try and shrink it down a little bit. The first stage is trauma. Every single one of us goes through childhood trauma. It's unavoidable. We're human, we're limited. Every parent makes mistakes. No parent, well, virtually no parent has ever taken a class on parenting. That doesn't make them bad people, but our society just doesn't, make it something that we feel is important. And so everyone's doing the best they can, but it's think of it. It's like asking somebody to build a space shuttle without being an aeronautical engineer. They have an idea where some of the pieces go because they've seen what a space shuttle looks like, but they're going to make some mistakes and can't fine tune everything because they're just missing some of the skills and tools. And so because of that, all of us have been wounded in childhood, and that wounding that happens, which can be, what people think of as severe or something just simple like parents rolling their eyes or not a divorce or not being, being a latchkey kid because a parent had to work, they're a single parent. Those create abandonment wounds or traumatic wounds of various degrees. Well, when that happens, the brain and body changes and it induces fear. And that becomes an emotional chemical addiction within the brain and body. Because of the way our brain works, our brain doesn't know the difference between something that's good or bad, right or wrong. All it cares about is what it's experienced in the past and it tries to repeat it, whether it's good or not. And so, because of that, our brain and body gets addicted to repeating the trauma that we experienced. And so, when we feel that trauma and fear, that creates the shame reaction, which is the loss of our inherent value and worth. And the shame aspect is very complex. Two things, we need two things as a species. The first thing is attachment. We must emotionally and physically attach to another human being or we'll die. The second thing we need is the pursuit of our authenticity, which you can think of as our ability to decide who we want to be, make our own choices, our inherent power and who we're going to be. Well, think of a child. They're at the mercy of mom and dad because their survival depends on it. And so when parents make mistakes, a child has a choice. I will die without attachment. I can live without my authentic self and pursuing who I really am. So that gets dropped. But the inability to pursue their authentic self creates a shame of, wait a minute, because mom and dad are perfectly imperfect and they made a mistake. If I become who I want, I'm going to break the rules. I'll lose attachment. So I'm going to drop who I am. And that's the loss of our inherent value and worth. And because we have to get that attachment. And so we develop shame-based false personas, beliefs about ourselves, reactions to situate people, places, and things that we think are our authentic self, but it's not. It's a loss of self. But most of this happens in the first 7 years of life. Well, in the first 7 years of life, we're in a theta brainwave state, which is the exact same as hypnosis. So we're not even present in our life. We're just downloading the emotional condition of our parents. And so when most of our brains come online, we had figured out a coping mechanism to create attachment. We think this is the person that we are, but it's all adaptive. It's not our authentic self. And that truth is so overwhelming, and our brains are so underdeveloped, both intellectually and emotionally, that it sends us into denial. It's the only way we can survive it is to deny the truth of our parents' imperfections and the ways they did abandon us or hurt us or whatever. We have to justify it, condone it, suppress it, repress it, minimize it, make it okay. Because remember, we need attachment to survive. Well, the problem is that becomes a repetitive cycle of every moment in childhood. We have a choice. Do I pursue my authentic self or attachment? Well, we keep dropping who we really are. So we get into adulthood, and what people don't realize is your career will tell me about your childhood trauma. So, for instance, a realtor, they grew up in a very chaotic home. They either moved a lot, they were an army brat, but there was no stability at home. And that's the process of buying and selling homes. So now, remember, authenticity is our inherent power. We had to drop it. So as an adult, this sounds really crazy, but we all, in every relationship, every career, every choice we make, we choose to re-victimize ourselves, to put ourselves back in the exact same position because we're trying to reconcile how we had to give up our authenticity for attachment. But because we don't teach about these things, people don't know, if you ended up with a narcissist, that tells me about your parents. And, if you're codependent, all of these different things, whatever career it is, all you're doing is repeating that pain against yourself because at least it gives you a sense of power. Because now you're an adult, you can choose it. Now, it's not that we consciously want to choose to victimize ourselves, but remember, our society hasn't taught about these things. The first book on psychology wasn't written until the 1870s. Then you had Freud and some others in the early 1900s. But it wasn't until the 1970s with Oprah, Phil Donahue, all the reality TV talk shows, where as a society, we started talking about childhood, relationships, emotions, trauma. So as a species, we're literally about 50 years in to discovering the most important aspects of life. So you can equate that, intellectual or emotionally, as far as relationships, parenting, and emotional development. As a species, it's like we haven't discovered that the earth isn't flat or how to build tools or fire. We're that new in the process of learning about all these things. We're all doing the best we can with the information we have, but your age group and society is starting to be more open to all of these things. And so we're starting to discover, oh my God, this is how it works. And this is what we all do. So it doesn't matter, like, one thing people have mistaken is they think there's something normal or somebody who, is successful, whether it's a politician, actress, athlete, business person, that they're normal and okay. Well, all of those are adaptations as well. Normal is all of us are hurt and all of us are stuck in the cycle and we all live it out in our own individual way. That's what normal is. There isn't anybody on this planet who's escaped childhood without this cycle. And so in 3 questions, you could bring anyone you wanted to me. And in 3 questions, I could show you how they're all stuck in the cycle. It's everybody, no matter how successful or unsuccessful a person is. Again, I want to make it clear, because of the shame and denial portion, many people hearing this will instantly feel, oh my God, he's saying I'm bad. Oh my God, he's saying there's something wrong with me. Well, that is proof of the cycle, because all emotions are learned in childhood. We're not born with them. And so because of the shame-based messaging, or whether it was either direct message of parents disparaging their child, or because life was crazy and busy and they couldn't meet the child's needs. So either directly or indirectly, we feel that loss of worth. And so when people hear me talk about the worst day cycle, if they're not familiar with my work, most will instantly feel a sense that they're bad or wrong and they're defective. That's proof of the cycle, because every single one of us is born with inherent value and worth. But because of this attachment authenticity bind, we lose that. And so anyone having a reaction to what I just described and feeling like, there's anything bad or wrong about them, that shows that, okay, well, now we're into truth because I teach four things: truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness. So now we're into truth that all of us are perfectly imperfect and have been through pain. The next step is we take responsibility and put a plan in place to learn about it, gather the knowledge, skills, and tools that we weren't taught. And we do that by doing the healing work. And from that place, we can forgive not only our caregivers, but ourselves for how we chose people, places, and things as adults that worked against us, not for us. So that's a really, that's about as short as I can make an explanation. I hope it gave you enough clarity on how it all works.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for explaining that. And it's definitely fascinating hearing hearing something like that out loud because, yeah, it's still not really talked about in that sense. And it is so easy to go to that place of feeling wrong or bad in any sort of manner.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that really all of us are stuck in this cycle. Is there any way to break free of the cycle, or is it going to be a lifelong challenge that we can just kind of work with rather than fully escape?
Well, the first thing to recognize is that any recovery program, any process that's out there, whether it's my emotional authenticity method or anything else that you pursue, that we're human and limited, which means we will never recover from everything. We can, if we pursue truth, responsibility, healing, and forgiveness, we can see dramatic and massive improvement on our perfect imperfections and the pain that we went through. Um, but there isn't a magic pill out there or any treatment that will make us never experience pain or perfect imperfections again. And we don't want that anyway. That's the life experience is about learning how to manage this because most people are trying to teach just be happy all the time. Anything dark and black or bad feelings is bad. Well, that's the problem. The only way to feel truly at peace and safe inside yourself is to become an expert in these deep, dark, painful feelings because life isn't just this side, it's all of that. And so, what I teach helps people navigate both sides. And from that, you're as complete as you can be. So the avoidance of the dark is what I call it. All it does is create more dark. That's shame and denial because this piece of ourselves with all these painful feelings, that's the rejected child. That's the child who feels I'm not good enough, I'm bad. And so the more we try and push that down and suppress it, the more the worst day cycle continues. The answer, it's a paradox. The answer is in the opposite. If you truly want to live happy, free, peaceful, the only way to do it is to become an expert in navigating the painful feelings. And that's my emotional authenticity processes. I hadn't seen anybody, my life struggle was reliving that cycle, multiple addictions, a physically and verbally abusive spouse, married two narcissists, played two pro sports I never wanted to play. All I did was victimize myself repeatedly. And I was following all the teachers out there that are primarily teaching this. Well, finally, I was contemplating taking my life. I have the email I sent my therapist while I was in the midst of that in my first book. And it wasn't what I realized is nobody's teaching about this. There isn't a process out there that gives you both. And that's what my emotional authenticity process does is it allows you, at least in my experience, it's the only way. I finally had to teach it to myself because nobody was teaching it. And so now that's whether it's my books, my classes, my online group or private sessions, that's the process I give to people so that they can see substantial recovery in their lifetime.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your past with us as well as about that process. And so what does that look like? Really paying attention to that other side of ourselves that most of us do not want to look at or want to push away. Does that just mean being aware of your dark thoughts, or what might that look like, really coming to terms with that?
That's a great question. And it all starts with this simple 3-question process that I've developed. The first question is, I have a free feelings wheel on my website, and you can download it. And it's keeping that with you. When I started this, I set an alarm on my phone, and every hour I'd look at it. Just do it as much as you can. And you pull that feelings wheel up and look at it and go, what am I feeling? Now, here's the difficulty. 70% of the population is detached from their feelings. They can't feel. So most people will start in the center of the circle, which are base feelings like happy, sad, scared. Now, as you develop emotional authenticity, you'll be able to move out on that wheel and get more what's called specificity and granularity, because you're going to learn how to reattach to yourself emotionally. Because every thought we ever have, this is another misconception in the personal development, is change your thoughts. We know neuroscientifically, every single thought you ever have starts with an emotion and a feeling. So recovery demands emotional authenticity and being gifted, well, developing the skills and tools emotionally. And so that's why the first question is, what am I feeling? Then you ask yourself, where in my body do I feel it? Because we store all emotional trauma, all pain physically in our body. The next question is, when was the first time I felt this feeling? Or you could also do, what am I thinking? And what is that thought? What feeling does it create? Where in my body? And then the third question would be, so when was the first time I had this thought / feeling? Now, most people will remember something in the last year or two. Write that down. Then ask yourself, okay, when was the last time I felt that before that? Write that down. Just keep going back. Eventually, all of us are going to land at something between 2 and 10 years old. So right there, what you've just proven to yourself is you're stuck in the worst day cycle. You've been repeating that thought and feeling, that traumatic moment your whole life. You're stuck. That's the pain that's never been dealt with. That's the dark, that because of the shame and denial portion of the cycle, we suppressed it. We've never healed it. We've never dealt with it. So now we're into truth. Oh my God, he's right. All I've done is repeat this pain against myself. I had no idea. Now, some people, because of their detachment from, they're pursuing attachment, they detach from themselves so much that they can't remember their childhood. That's okay. Everybody remembers an age range of, well, I don't remember a specific incident of mom or dad saying or doing something, but somewhere around this age, I just have a feeling from there. And that's all you need to work through this. You don't have to remember the specific events. When you start doing this work, everybody starts remembering their childhood. It just, because your brain starts to go, oh, we're not going to deny the pain. We're going to get into truth, responsibility, and healing, and it'll start to release those things, and you'll start to put those pieces. And all of a sudden, you're going to see, oh my gosh. Like for me, my dad rolling his eyes at me when I asked him for help with homework. My first wife did the exact same thing whenever I made a request for intimacy or connection. And so I went, oh my God, I'm just reliving my father. It's the exact same thing. And so the problem isn't her. The problem is my reaction back here. And my emotional authenticity method gives you the process to rework that emotion so that you create what's called a new definition. And when you have because my adult self can look back and go, oh, dad wasn't rejecting me. It had nothing to do with me. My dad was beat to death as a kid. My parents were 16 and 18 when they were married, 21 and 23 with 4 kids. My dad was overwhelmed with the responsibility. No one taught him he needed to pursue recovery from being beat as a kid. So my dad was filled with rage. He didn't know how to attach. He was scared to death of attachment. So in that moment, when my father rolled his eyes, he was reliving his childhood. Because a request for intimacy for him meant he was going to get a belt. And my dad didn't know that. And so from now as the adult, I can rework that and create a new definition of, okay, it's not okay that the best my dad could do was roll his eyes. but I can have empathy and forgiveness for that. And I can let that go. And I can realize, because now I see my father as a hurt child, no longer is this powerful force who has control over me. We're both the same. We're two hurt children. And that lessens, and that allows us to create a new definition. There are many other aspects to it, but I'm leaving a lot of it out, just trying to get to the base point so a person listening can see, oh my God, I can see how that would totally soften the blow of the pain I went in, because now I see it's just two children that are doing that, and kids can't process emotions. And so now I can look at that moment and not shame myself and go, oh, dad was saying he didn't love me. No, dad was saying he didn't, no one taught him how to love himself. Well, that's heartbreaking. And now I can move beyond that. And so now when those moments come up and I see somebody roll their eyes, I recognize, oh, that's the kid in them. It's not my partner rejecting me. They're reliving their pain. And so now I stay what's called mature and moderate. That's the recovery response. I don't take on somebody else's pain or make it about me. I now have an internal boundary around their pain. That shame doesn't come in.
Mm, beautifully said, and that is such a good way to reframe it. I love how you mentioned perceiving your father coming down to being in the same place as you in a sense, because when you're a kid, you definitely cannot
Yeah,
think of it that way. But when you're older, you do have the space and the time to really reflect and change your thoughts and your beliefs. And I could see how it could be kind of a frightening thing almost in a sense,
it
coming to
is.
terms with everything they're doing isn't about you, which
Not.
is good, but at the same time, I could see that being kind of a confronting, feeling.
Yeah.
So, what would you say for anyone who's, like, heard what your story, heard what you just mentioned, and is like, "I don't want to feel that way or live my life that way," but
That
yeah.
that's a beautiful question, because my latest book, Your Journey to Being Yourself, I it's all about that. And that's denial. And that's why I say the single greatest killer on the planet today isn't COVID, isn't cancer, isn't anything like that. It's denial and self-deception. Because of the worst day cycle, and because this has been going on for thousands of years, our immediate response is to deny truth and deny healing. In other words, it keeps us sick and hurt and in pain away from this. And yes, it is confrontive, because immediately what happens is it triggers that shame that says, it puts us right back down into that child space of when we felt we weren't, our value and worth was diminished and our parents weren't there for us. And so it is this internal battle. And that's why the single most important skill a person needs to develop to recover from any of this is to learn how to confront their denial and self-deception. And that, I don't see anybody, that's my expertise. That's what all of my processes walk somebody. Think of it this way. Remember the Wizard of Oz?
Yes.
Remember the yellow brick road, and Dorothy is standing there and she's all excited because she sees the rainbow. She wants all of that, but she can't see where the road goes. She knows it takes her there, but she's fearful of it, of what's going to be there, because she's never walked that road to the rainbow of basically all these happy feelings. Well, that's what my emotional authenticity process does. It lays the golden bricks in front of a person and walks them down that path so they can slowly and over time get more and more comfortable confronting that self-deception and denial, feel safe in navigating and lessening the shame that makes them want to not pursue it, because that's what they're missing, is a process of golden bricks in front of them, taking them step by step through all those twists and turns along that journey to the rainbow, where now they can experience the full expression of emotions, not this, and not trying to shun this, because this dark side, that's the child who was rejected. And so everyone hates themselves when that comes up. And the answer, again, is a paradox. It's in the opposite. No, this is these dark feelings, that everything you brought up of, ooh, I don't want to go there. Every time you do that, you are now being the parent to your broken child going, no, I don't like you. I don't want to love you. And that's what emotional authenticity teaches you is, oh, no, no, this is the side that needs the love the most. It needs to be confronted. It needs to be pursued. It needs to be loved. That's what it's missing. And so again, we've all been taught the answer is to ignore it. But, my book points out that almost everything we've been taught in personal development, the answer's in the opposite. It's all the answers are over here. And nobody had laid out a process on how to go over here. And that's what I've done is here's how you do it. And so you can navigate all that fear, shame, and denial that comes up from that, that's proof of the original wound is, oh my God, I'll be bad and wrong if I pursue my authentic self, because I became all of these things to get attachment. So if I let that go, mom and dad won't love me. Well, the answer is in the opposite. Love can only happen when there's truth. And so if I'm not living in my authentic self, trying to protect my parents, I'm actually abusing my parents because they don't know who I am. Think of how many people, the most stressful time in life is holidays. Why is that? Because we can't be our authentic selves. We're always suppressing who we are to get attachment. Well, this changes that. And so it's not that our parents need to change, but when you learn this process, you learn to see them as the child, not the adult. And so they no longer hurt you. And so I remember when that happened to me, I was sitting on the couch while my dad was dying and he had cancer. And it all flooded into me. He was yelling at the TV. My dad loved to judge and criticize everyone on TV. And as I watched him, what I finally saw was, oh my God, he's just a hurt little boy. And I realized my dad, whenever I started to succeed, would cut my feet out from under me, would sabotage me. And I always took it personally. And as he said to me, Kenny, of all the kids, you got the least. Well, in that moment, what I saw was, oh my God, because what I realized was my dad was incredibly gifted emotionally, but his childhood taught him to feel anything emotionally was bad because he got beat. So he suppressed all his authentic self and became an engineer. Well, what I saw was the reason my dad came after me was I was him. I was his unrealized potential. I was a mirror to what he never pursued in himself. And so it wasn't a hatred of me or disliking of me. It was he was taught he had to reject himself. So he was just doing the best he could. No one ever helped him out of it. And so his attacks were never meant for me. And in that moment, I was set free. I had attachment to my father like I never had because now I saw the truth about both of us. And that's the reconciliation is we don't need them to change. When we do this work, we feel attachment that we never got. It reconciles that wound and they don't have to change a darn thing. And so we can sit in that peace and pursue ourselves. And so when my dad would make a snide comment, I just look at him and go, I love you, Dad. It sounds like that's really frustrating for you. Thanks for sharing. I didn't take it personal because I knew he was just telling me about his pain. And so from that place, this child who's so hurt is no longer hurt.
So beautifully said. And yes, that reframe would definitely be such a powerful influence in one's life coming to terms with something like that. And it was so amazing hearing what you had to share with us today. I think we should dive deeper about how people can learn a little bit more about you and your work. I know you have your emotional mastery course as well as your amazing emotional authenticity method. And we have buttons for both of those below if you'd like to tell us a little bit about those.
Sure. How I started this off by telling, about the first three questions to ask. I offer the initial part of that because to me it's critical. If somebody doesn't know how to connect emotionally, they can't run their life because remember, like I said, every action, every thought starts with an emotion and feeling. And so, yeah, I decided to make the initial part of the process free so everybody can at least begin that. Now, for those that are ready for the complete process, well, then I offer the classes in, two ways. You can either buy it in bulk, a one-time payment. So because you're gonna need to go through the classes repetitively. The first time through, many of the questions, because of the detachment from our authenticity, you won't know what your needs and wants are, your morals and values. There are a lot of questions because you've had to detach from your authentic self, you won't really know. Well, as you work through all of the classes, the second time through, all of a sudden, what was the first time one or two sentences becomes paragraphs because you've learned to feel and connect and discover who you really are, all that you had to deny and suppress. And so the more, like I put myself through my own classes once a year, and I'm still uncovering more and more of what I call the authentic self cycle, which is how you beat the worst day cycle. So those are the two options. You can start with the free one, begin learning the emotional authenticity process. And for those that are like, no, I'm done, I want to become an expert and really get to that rainbow, then you can either do the monthly subscription option or buy it in bulk. And so whenever I add classes, you get it for free. You don't ever have to pay anymore.
Lovely. Thank you so much for offering those amazing resources. And as a reminder to everybody watching or listening, you can check those out by hitting the buttons below to head over to Kenny's website. And then, are there any final insights you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Um, just remember that you can only do what you know. So if it felt confrontive to go, whoa, I've been victimizing myself, you're not to blame. It's not your fault because all you were doing was what was taught to you. So using that analogy of the spaceship, why would you blame yourself that nobody taught you that this is how it works? You just did the best you could with the information you had at the time. So you're not to blame for that. And so the thing to realize is if you've never heard me talk about this stuff, today is no matter your age, whether you're 20, 40, 60, 80, today is the first day in your life you've ever had a choice. You didn't know there was another way to live. You never knew about this. And so today it's like you were born today. Anything that happened before here, yes, there are consequences for not knowing this. We all have to take responsibility for the consequences, but we're not to blame. It's not our fault. But from this day forward, for the first time in your life, you have a choice. You can choose to stay stuck in that pain, or you can choose to get out of it, whichever one you want. Now, if you choose not to, I wouldn't blame myself. But when you're ready, at least you know where to go. And you never had that before. So what I'm really trying to get across is don't blame yourself. You did the best you could with where you are at the time. As we know more, we can do more. And so today you have a choice if you want to know more and be able to do more.
Thank you so much for bringing some light to that choice with us today, as well as sharing your wisdom with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And I also want to thank our Avaya students for being here with us today. And we will see you again soon. Take care.